this is a bonus episode.
Number 8 in our roll, I think, or 9.
Is it really?
Yeah, number 8. Although this won't be a normal episode, so there's not many people we know that have been here around since CBC has began. So we just wanted to kind of pick your brain or ask you, or maybe Phil even has some questions about the starting of CBC. Yep. So Phil, why don't you...
Should I fire away?
Yeah.
Why not?
All right. So I've heard a lot of stories from you, thankfully. But one thing I haven't ever asked you, and I'm just curious about, and you were talking about some of this with faith with Jesus. I think we look back, a little bit of context. We look back, I do at least. I've been here quite a while now, 17 years almost. Sam's been here his whole life, which
33.
Is 33 years.
Yeah.
And we think, it just kind of happened. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's our tendency as people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what I'd like a little bit of, long as you want, is a walkthrough of, why did you decide to make another church? And I know some of that, but it would be good for me to hear more. And then really, the question I have is, what was that process like? Like the prayer in it, the trusting God in it, the fasting, you know what I mean? Like a real description, because I've never heard that.
Well, let me start with a comment that my friend Fred Smith used to say. He was a Baptist, a member of First Baptist, but he would say the Baptists have a great way of church planting. They started church and then split. I think one of the rare pieces in our starting, and in one very real sense, it wasn't a church plant. It was more of a church transplant. Mm-hmm. But there was never, in any of our bones, there was never, we don't like this. In fact, to be honest, when we came, we had never seen a church like Believers Chapel. We'd never seen the meeting of the church work like it did. And my great fear was, when I graduated from seminary, was I'd go somewhere less than what we had experienced. And so I really was apprehensive about going back to what normally was out there. But when we came, they started by meeting in a garage. And then they rented Betty Hoffman's school. And at that point, Bill McRae was doing a sort of Sunday school, but it was a sermon while Sunday school was going on. And then Dr. Johnson did the 11 o'clock message. And that we outgrew that building and started looking, and it basically said, we don't want to build a big church. We want to build it to, I think, handle 300, 350, whatever the building was. And when we reach that, we'll start another church. And so the second Sunday, Dr. Johnson wasn't there, Stan Toussaint was, and we were overcrowded. And so we went from 2 services to 3, and then ultimately to 4. And I came in a little bit later and was doing the inner 2 services. But the reality was the elders at Believers did not want to get big. And so they were sort of troubled. And we got to the point where we would have about 2,000 people coming in and out.
Wow.
Most of whom we did not know. Many of whom we did not know. And here's one funny story. So to give you the feel of what that was like, the 8 o'clock service I called the sneaker service. And it was people that were in liberal churches and whatever, and their kids, generally they're college age kids, saying, you need to be here. Lee Crandall, that was the case with him and many others. And so you had this bunch of folks coming together. Well, anyway, a lot of evangelism taking place. So in one instance, there was a gal sitting in the back row, and some guy she didn't know sat down next to her. And after Bill was in Romans, and so afterwards she engaged him, and she said, well, how long have you been a Christian? The guy says, 30 minutes. I mean, it was during the days when people had a real hunger for the teaching of the word. So you didn't want to turn them out But on the other hand, we didn't know them.
Yeah.
And so I had a case where I was involved in a funeral, and lo and behold, this guy, it was in the young adults class. He had been married twice, I think.
Oh, wow.
He committed suicide, and nobody really knew anything about him. And you're saying, how do you shepherd the sheep? And so it wasn't that we disagreed with their theology. We just saw that somehow the implementation by the size of the group, and they were more than eager for us to start. In fact, they shut down one service of the four. So they literally pushed people out. And the humor of it was, Believers Chapel never did anything quickly. Well, we met, a group of guys met for a year, and we wanted to be sure that we didn't just adopt carte blanche the theology of the chapel.
Yeah.
We wanted to think our way through that. And so we've been doing that. But when it got down to it, the elders of Believers Chapel said to us, for crying out loud, get going. And I thought, now there's a twist.
Yeah.
But the other thing that was interesting is one of the elders said, I think that while I was still preaching there, I think you ought to do a series on the local church, and you ought to emphasize anything different that you would do. And so it was just a wide open door. There was no hostility. And in fact, financially, I think we didn't know initially how that would all shake out, but they were with us, really subsidizing kind of for 3 years.
Yeah.
And so everything was really positive. And in fact, one of the elders that I really had respect for, Howard Pryor, he died a couple of years ago now, and I went to see him when he was just 100.
Wow.
And it was beautiful. You know, a man that I deeply respected and admired, and what a great time of fellowship. And here I came in as this young punk from the Tulies. You got to understand, I am obviously a country boy, and Lewis Johnson is a deep South aristocrat. His voice, oh my goodness. And I could never, for the life of me, figure out, how can he even put up with me? You know, I mean, it was just really, you'd have to understand. And one Sunday night, one of the sort of starting things is, we met on Sunday evenings for the worship time rather than Sunday morning. And I got up and I spoke on a text, and Dr. Johnson had what I call the Big Boy Bible, which is the Hebrew and the Greek text. It's big enough to brain a burglar. And he starts taking notes, and I'm looking right across at him and thinking, oh, my back, it's so bad. he's got to write them down so he doesn't forget them. And he got up at the end of that and said, it's my job as an elder to recognize spiritual gifts. That's what I'm doing. Sat down. Never said a word to me other than that. Just was bizarre. And so he, and of course, Bill McRae was a good friend. So I had several good friends, I think, amongst the leaders that were certainly supportive at best. So when we decided that we would just continue to get bigger and turning people out. Oh, I didn't tell you my story about the parking yet.
Okay.
So long and the short of it is, the parking lot would be crowded and whatever.
Yeah.
And this is to give you an idea of who came. So one of my friends, Ed Neal, was a deacon, and there was a fire zone right there. And this guy rolls up in his Cadillac, gets out, and Ed goes over and he says, pardon me, sir, but could you park your car over in that way? Guy looks him in the eye and says, go to hell.
What?
And walks into church.
Whoa.
Yeah, and you're just saying,
What?
Whoa, this is interesting.
The dichotomy of that statement and walking right into
You know,
teaching.
I mean, and so those were just fascinating days of people coming to faith and wanting to hear the Word of God. But the elders were very supportive and encouraging of us to take our time, think our way through it, and whatever. And so that's how we began. So on our first Sunday, we probably had 70 or 80 folks there, maybe a little more. And we ended up meeting in a school in Carrollton. And Jim Ellis came that first Sunday. I don't think Gail was a believer at that point.
Oh, wow.
And he was a very new believer.
Wow.
But anyway, that's the way we started. We're in that school for a year and then moved to the Marriott, which was just a few blocks from Believers.
Okay.
And then purchased our property. Interestingly, I think they looked at like 100 to 200 places
So crazy.
to as possibilities, and ended up with our first building. So anyway, we met for a year, and one of the things that we concluded was that we thought that the meeting of the church should not be sidelined to Sunday night.
Yeah.
And so for us, that was really huge. So we welded it to Sunday morning. And Believers, what was interesting is we never anticipated when those people came with us from Believers Chapel, some were shocked because they had never been to the Lord's Supper. And they didn't realize how things worked.
Yeah.
And so it was like, whoa, what is this? So Sunday morning was viewed as outreach, but it was worship for us.
So hold on. At Believers Chapel, so I know a little bit about them now, but I don't know them then.
Yeah.
So Sunday morning preaching and stuff was like an outreach.
It was.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's so different than I've never heard that.
And again, it's part of it is, this was Key 73, all the crusade stuff that was going
that
on.
Time frame, yeah.
It was just a very unique period of time.
Yeah.
And so that's the way we started. Initially, one of the other things that we do is that we call it sermon seminar or whatever we're calling it today, but I think it's very important. And so we had the kids. The Sunday school was being taught the same material as the adults, and I think we were probably in the Book of Acts at that moment in time, and so I would have to meet then midweek with the Sunday school teachers to go through the stuff, and that's what morphed eventually into our preaching seminar, where people came and were involved in that part. So I think that's one of our strong points. So I would say that plus the meeting of the church, where we really encourage participation.
Yeah.
And I think we've done a reasonably good job in correction. So if you guys remember, not too many weeks ago, an older gentleman got up and didn't know where the pause button was. And but I have to say, that was the most gentle, and what would have killed it is for somebody to stomp him.
Yeah.
And every guy in there would have said, I'm not taking that chance.
Yeah.
So I think we've really seen, I think the open meeting that we're doing is really the leadership development thing. And sadly, I think in many top-down churches, the pastor doesn't want competition, certainly doesn't want to be replaced. And so consequently, he's not as interested in discipleship as they tell you he is. And so I think that's just a huge thing, and that's why Steve, I know, marvels, and so do I, with him, that we have as many people who are really scripturally adept. And one of my great joys is when a non-elder sees a problem and gently fixes it.
Yeah.
It doesn't take an elder to get back on course. And so Jim Ellis, for example, will be a guy who can fix something and you move on.
Yeah.
So anyway, we met in the school, and then we met. And there were times, because the school districts, that wasn't a big deal. Let's rent to a church. But
Right,
that
it
school
would be,
was
yeah.
virtually empty because of the demographics.
Oh,
Kids weren't there.
interesting.
So they needed some justification
Yeah.
to keep the doors open. And so there were times when we would have to say, we're not sure whether they're going to renew.
Right.
And so next week we'll have to call you if we're not and
Wow.
then we went to the Marriott.
That's cool.
And I think we're there for about a year, and then found the building that we were in on Abrams.
So for that year, this is kind of a more drill down question. I'm curious. What did you do? Who met with you for a year? Did you pray? Did you fast? Without giving many details, I would like to, I'm just curious about that decision. I know kind of why you did it now, that it was overflowing, but like, what was that decision? In that year, what did you do? And who was involved?
I think, one, there was discussion with the elders. I tell you, one, we did not fast.
Okay.
But I think it was so far out of our bandwidth at that
Sure.
point that it wasn't part. Prayed a lot
Yeah.
and met weekly to talk about it. One of the things that we felt believers might have tripped up a little bit on is when they started to meet and they met in the garage, they actually had I think a time that it didn't really work, and then they started again. But they were trying to figure out, you need leadership, and so they called them acting elders. The problem is they didn't have a way of moving from acting to real elders.
Yeah.
And so finally, after several years, somebody just said, well, why don't you just call yourself elders? So they never really had, I don't want to say a purge, but for us, we said, we met with the elders of believers, and we had what we call provisional leaders, and that they approved of. And then Alan Hall, one of their elders, joined us for 6 months. And he just went through his funeral a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. Anyway, I think that was very helpful and stabilizing. But then what we said is we're gonna lead for a year, but we're gonna resign at the end of that year. We're gonna resign. We'll work through the scriptures on leadership, and then we'll go through a process. So we had sort of nominations and whatever. And I would say half of the guys that were sort of in the leadership core, they may not have been called provisional leaders, but half of those guys came through as elders, and the others did not. And it wasn't really ugly, or there wasn't any nasty parts to that. But I think, and now I've actually suggested sometimes to churches that don't really have qualified elders, and my conclusion is you have to have leaders of some sort, and so don't call them elders if they're not, but call them provisional leaders, and purpose that sooner or later you're gonna dissolve, and you're gonna start. So that's how our leadership kind of came along, and I think the other piece that was unique about us was our diversity, which is kind of a nasty word today. Well, I mean, you know what I mean. It's,
Sure, yeah. People use it negatively.
Yeah. But I have a great debt to Jerry Johnson. Yeah. I owe him a lot. He was a good friend. He was, I think, I think he was shunned to some degree. Not here, but in other places.
Well,
and
when did the seminary integrate? It wasn't until 1980 or mid-70s?
You're right. They took in African students.
Yeah.
I don't know how you play that game.
Yeah.
And then I think, Tony Evans was one of the first.
Yeah, if not the first, right?
Western, whatever you want to do. And to his credit, he stayed black. Yeah. I think the seminary wanted a tan. Well, I don't mean that as kindly. And it was Gene Getz, I think, that said to him, "Don't cave in. Be what you are."
Yeah.
And I respect that piece.
But
So-
just putting that in the context of America at that time.
Right. 'Cause
Oh,
this is
oh.
the mid 70s.
70s, yeah. I mean, this was...
So interestingly, Jerry was just a super, and I was so stupid.
Jerry's a black man, by the way. That's why
We
we're...
don't know.
I guess I should, yeah. But I would say use some word or something, and I had no clue that we had no blacks in our town at all. I was clueless. And then to add to that, Haddon Robinson was involved some in the ministry at Believers, and he got involved in a Black Evangelistic Enterprise. And so he basically recruited me, and I was 25 years with those guys. And so with that, and we actually, Black Evangelistic Enterprise actually sort of founded Tony's church. We supported it. We were the ones that were sort of behind that. So I broadened my sort of my exposure. So then we ended up with some biracial things, maybe Eastern versus Eastern and Western. Wasn't just black and white, but some other things. And so we just, I don't want to say we took affirmative action. We just didn't see the difference.
Yeah.
And so Jerry was just huge. And then, other folks came along. So one of the things that I've just really loved is the diversity. And it was interesting when we were in Toronto, I went to People's Church with Bill and Marilyn.
Yeah.
And the diversity of that city,
Yeah.
holy cow. And so I love the fact that, you don't know. You may have at one point, you could have a Japanese guy, Caribbean black, whatever, and Mexican, Hispanic, whatever. You had all these different shapes, which is what heaven ought to be like.
Yeah,
Right.
it will be.
And somehow the Lord brought us through that without any disasters. And I think that's part of what we are. And even Berlin.
Yeah.
Oh, that didn't sound like it came out right. But what I mean by that is, no, I mean, I'm now including her, but even on our staff, to have diversity, to have somebody who's bilingual, that's huge.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're basically saying, as many people do, you want to talk to me, you talk in my language. That's just a beautiful thing.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's, and the preaching has pretty much gone on. I mean, I don't think there's been any radical things. We've adjusted our schedule a bit, whatever.
How old were you when all of this was happening? Just starting out?
Well,
I'm
that's
curious.
part of the issue is we some people called us the youngers, and it was. I mean, don't think we didn't know that who we were, but again, maybe that helped us to be a little humble. And to take advice and counsel.
And a little flexible.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think that's where Believers, they had amongst their 6 or 7 elders at the time, at least 3 doctors. And so I'm not against doctors, but I think you had a more uniform group. And so I just take great joy. And one of my favorite things is Leonard Luton. I love it when the guy who is, whatever you want to call him, your head custodian, who's one of the best worship leaders you got.
Yeah.
You know, that just makes me smile. And a guy like Ken Looney and others who just don't polish it up. So the beauty of an elders meeting for me is, one is I pretty well, I don't make a big thing of it, but I try to know each guy and where he's at and where he's likely to go. And so one of the problems, I think, for me is if people ask me a question, I don't want that to come across as this is the answer. And I try to give something that says, well, the elders as a group probably would end up here.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to watch the different guys, and I can think my way around that table, as it used to be at least. But one of my really happy memories about the unity amongst the elders was there was some issue that came up, and I don't even remember what it was. And Stan Schultz had said something. He's not contentious at all, but he had just raised the question that was a good question to raise, and we'd kind of gone around the horn a couple of times, and then it seemed like we were resolved, but he hadn't really spoken recently. I'll never forget. We were just about ready to, in a sense, make it formal, and Joe Baird put a pause. He puts his arm around Stan, who was sitting right next to him. He said, "Are you with us on this, brother?" He wasn't going to move ahead unless he felt like Stan's questions were settled. And so I don't know how you.
That's funny. Stan was an awesome man. I was in their ministry group for a long time. I have a memory. I was not an elder. I'm not an elder, but I went to an elders meeting when I first got on staff about ISI. And there were some things in that meeting I will never forget. I was on staff for like a year, and we had a lot of success at that time. And you said something, and Stan said something in that same meeting. You said, "Well, I said there's some problems." Like, well, what do you expect when you're growing? So that was good. I was like, that's a point. When the Lord works, you're gonna have problems and good things to help us work through that. So that was one thing. But also, Stan, we were talking about numbers, and I was like, man, we might get this big, and he's like. And he just, he said he's short, he's a little bit like Charles Raymond. Short things, he said, and that's a good thing? And I'm like, oh. Well, let me think about that for a second, you know what I mean? Like, just a good perspective. Because I have been in the past, certainly there's a temptation to kind of be obsessed about bigness, right?
Yeah.
It was a good check. And that was in that same elders meeting. That must have been. Because Hezekiah's, he'll be 12. So that would have been almost 13 years ago,
There, and I probably told these stories, you may know it or not, but Phil does. But there were really encouraging decisions. I remember one guy who wasn't a member of our church, whose daughter was a member, and he said, I want to give the church $10,000 to buy a grand piano. Had a crummy piano. $10,000 then was pretty good piano.
Money now.
So you would think, here's a no-brainer.
Right.
And so bring it up at the elders meeting, give me the money. One of the elders, Hugh Blevins, tips his head back, as he always did. Looks, and oh boy, that machine's working. And it's a lot faster than mine. And he said, so how important is music to us? Well, yeah, it's important. Then why are we taking all of his money? We took 5. And we came up with 5. The other one, and there were many of those kind of deals, but Steve and Annie Chapman were fairly new in the game, and one of our guys knew their PR, whatever the manager kind of guys is, and they were in Dallas, and they had Saturday night free. And they said to one of our guys, that's empty, we'll do it half price. And again, you're thinking, well, shoot, that's no big deal. Hugh said, so what would a good night be for them? That's what I want to pay them. They never forgot it. They know that to this day, they have not forgotten that. But it's just a way of thinking. And so it's to have elders who really are not think-alikes, but who respect each other's gifting. It's exhilarating. to be a part. And you go to an elders meeting, you think, well, this will probably be the way it goes.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, gee, I never thought of that. and most everybody comes out of that meeting. Those are just hugely encouraging in terms of, again, plurality.
Right.
I have a point of view, but it's a point of view.
Yeah.
Frankly, I think that's one of the big problems in our culture is many of the churches, if not everyone to a T, and you do this with Bible.org, but you just go read the headlines. This church fails, that church fails. Well, inevitably, one of the problems is abuse at the top.
One guy.
It is.
One guy or
It is.
a small group of people. I mean, there was, Ravi Zacharias, just looking at what happened there was no plurality, and everyone under him just kind of towed the line,
So I'll tell you a couple of stories now. So when we were in our old building, the house that was the parsonage was the youth building. And Randy and Val Zeller were coming to community, and Hannah, I used to call her my little brown-eyed booger, 2 years old. She'd go everywhere on my shoulders, and just, we had a lot of fun. So anyway, I'm preaching away, and it's probably 5 minutes after 12, and Hannah and the family are over in the youth building, and Hannah says, "Can I go say hi to Uncle Bob?" And her mom says yes, and doesn't think about
the time.
And so here's this thing, Mama's way back there trying to catch. It ain't gonna happen.
Oh, man.
I'm preaching like crazy and not really thinking about things. I see the movement coming down toward me, but that you go through that door and off to the restroom,
Right. Yeah,
and so you're thinking, yeah, big deal. So all of a sudden, I got this tug on my pant leg, and she says, "Hi, Uncle Bob." I picked her up and finished.
Okay.
And it was just like, well, and then the one with Don Adair.
Okay.
When we're in communion, and unfortunately, people have kind of seats they by habit sit in. But anyway, Don is sitting with his wife. He's on the end of the row, and so the communion cup comes his way, and he's really deep in thought and prayer, and somebody has to poke him with the tray, and and so he gets it, takes it, and then realizes I'm the end guy. So he gets up, takes it up to the front, comes back, and sits one row off next to a single girl. I think it got to the point of his arm going around there.
No!
And by this time, everybody is snorting and snickering. He finally comes to, looks at her, yelps, and jumps up and goes and sits back one row.
Oh, man.
And all the rest of the service, it's real quiet, and then somebody snorts. And off we go.
Oh, man.
And it's just like, oh my goodness sakes. How did we? And a gal named Betty Mataski. Do you remember her?
Uh-uh.
Betty Mataski was a gal who was driving to some other church, got lost, ends up in our parking lot and says, "Oh, what the heck?" And he stays. She's really cute. It's Easter.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason in the world, I did it. I made some smart aleck comment about Easter hats. Whoosh!
Oh.
She whipped that hat off so fast it made my head spin.
Oh, no.
And one time we had, I made a comment about, it was during the Olympics, and I made a comment about, we could take and hold up signs for the numbers, whatever, the next week. Signs up.
Some jerk did that. That's like
what-
Will Heron
all
would do
over.
that.
And then when it was in the Cowboys season, somebody put a TV in the pulpit.
No way.
Yeah.
That's funny. I can see, yeah.
So, you had just these incredible things. I'll never forget when we did Lee Crandall's funeral. And I've got this thing about funerals. I do not want funeral parlor music and whatever. And so the organist and pianist, they know what I'm not going to accept. And so they do basically a kind of a concert, at the beginning and then at the end. And so this was Brenda Smith and probably Kay Manus on the organ, if I remember right.
Okay.
And so Lee was really special to us, and so it was a sad tearful moment. But I'll never forget at the end, Brenda played her heart out. She laid her head down on the keyboard and wept. And Faith Haynes slipped up beside her, sat on the bench, put her arm around her.
Yeah.
And it was just like, And then later with Lee's, it was rainy that day. Oh, it was a mess. So we're down at Restland for the graveside, and one of Lee's relatives was doing that part. And Gary Boatman, Craig Morris, myself, and Bill Humphreys. And so there were 4 of us in the Jeep, and everybody had left. It was still raining. And we're sitting there waiting for Bill. We don't know what's going on. Bill taps on the window and says, "You guys go ahead, I'll walk." Well, why? He said, "I won't leave him until he's in the ground." Never said a word. All 4 of us got out there and stood by that graveside. That was just precious. Bill.
Well, Bob, I have one more question. It's 35. I don't know if Sam has.
Yeah, you're out of time.
Thinking about the next few years in our culture, what do you think some of the challenges for CBC will be? Or, you deal with a lot of people still, though you're retired. If you were to say, hey, these are the top couple of things that we should be thinking and praying about, what would those be?
Well, I think one will always be the church versus culture. I think culture is going to, as Paul says, don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. I think the culture is always going to be working against us. I don't think that we have the hots to grow big and be a mega church. But when you take things like our emphasis on male leadership, that some people will walk in that door and spin right around and walk out, and that's their choice. But I don't think they'll find themselves in churches where male leadership is being developed. I think there's always the danger of weaseling on the gospel. And so they just nibble at the ends, which seems, at the moment seems minimal. And often it's in the marketing, let's make it more appealing or whatever. So the gospel's always going to be at issue, which is why I think the Lord's Supper is so critical. God's bringing us back and saying, let's get down to the fundamentals. And, we're pretty stupid people, and we're pretty forgetful, and the Lord knows it, and basically said, here it is. So I think those would be, well, and then obviously Satan has learned to attack at the higher levels of leadership, which is, again, I think one of the good reasons why you diversify your leadership is you don't have one person who somehow, whatever. And so I think I personally think we are not far from a house church environment. I think that when this environment, which seemingly it's sort of like the church back in Rome, where how cozy are you going to get? I think that we're going to see that eventually the culture is going to turn government to our enemy, and the truth is, I think we ought to be there again. You need diversity of leadership to spread them out, and we go on. So to me, those are big ones.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we don't have a closing out for this segment, but Bob, we appreciate you coming on, and wish you could come on a little more often. But hopefully, we'll have some stories from some other people, of about our 50th year anniversary that's coming up here in June. So,
that'll be good.
Yeah, awesome.
That'll be good.
Well, great. Yeah, Bob, why don't you pray for us?
All right. Lord, thank you for CBC what an amazing thing it was to think that everything had to be downhill after seminary, and the reality is it's been the opposite. And the things I hear from other people in other churches and the agony that they go through, thank you, Lord, that you've spared us from so much. And we pray that you would continue to give us unity, faithfulness to your word, and that you would raise up additional leaders to carry on the work and to bring honor to your name. In Jesus' name, amen.